You don't even have that with LaPorta. You're just running him out there to get nothing.
I'm old enough to remember folks freaking out over the fact that Joe Burrow couldn't pick up a water bottle correctly.
I mean, this is more than what the Cowboys got for Amari Cooper.
Spoiler, this is one of the few guys that I don't think is actually a fraud after his last week's big performance.
It'd be great to know, 49ers beat reporters, the CMC isn't playing in week 1.
Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartiz. It is a great day to be great. It's a great day to break down all of the biggest fantasy questions ahead of what should be an ever-eventful Week 10. But I cannot do that alone, and accordingly, joining me today, as they do every Wednesday, we have Fantasy Life's finest Chris Allen and, of course, Dwayne "The Rock" McFarland. Chris, happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. We've got about a month left before the fantasy playoffs. Still plenty of time for folks to get their rosters in position to get back into the big dance and win a championship. Happy to help out. Let's see if we can dive into it, man.
Dwayne, feeling from 1 to 10 on activating Nico Collins and or Christian McCaffrey off your IR?
25. Go on. Yes, these are the moments we're living for. Look, we've had so many injuries. Knowing that we're getting some of these players back, it's really big. We got Puka back, then we didn't have Puka back for the fake punch. You know, our emotions have been all over the place the last couple of weeks. So yeah, getting these two players back. Thought you had a great tweet yesterday. Folks will have to go check it out. I don't know if it's PG enough for the show, but yeah, really good tweet about getting to put CMC off, take CMC off of IR, put him back in your lineup. It is a great feeling.
Go check it out, ladies and mostly gentlemen. But guys, before we get into, again, more questions, maybe some CMC related, going to break down what was not a very eventful NFL trade deadline. Let's face it. Already talked about, again, the Khalil Herbert and the Jonathan Mingo trades yesterday. More on Mingo and maybe our dissatisfaction with that here in just a couple of minutes. But Dwayne and Chris, the one trade that did break after our show, Mike Williams sent from the New York Jets to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They did get a 5th rounder back. The Steelers will take on the rest of Mike Williams' contract for this season. He will become a free agent that season then. So, Dwayne, yes, Mike Williams, even at this point in his career, we probably can safely say he's an upgrade from guys like Van Jefferson. That said, probably not going to be someone we're overly interested in Fantasyland.
Yeah, at least not yet. I think theoretically, like down the stretch, we might get a little bit of a surprise, right? Russell Wilson's out here throwing for over 250 yards a game. Russ can really shoot the deep ball down the field. That's what Mike Williams does well. You know, he's 30 years old, coming off of an ACL. I don't think we really had that high of expectations for Mike Williams until around mid-season this year anyway. So we're a little bit past that. Now he has to acclimate to a new offense. But to your point, like, it's not a huge barrier to entry as far as getting on the field. We do have Arthur Smith, though, who's very willing to rotate these guys. So my one plea, Ian, is please, for the love, Arthur Smith, don't let this mean that we have to rotate George Pickens off the field and we somehow see Van Jefferson with a 90% route participation. Because I'm sorry, that is the sort of thing Arthur Smith will do just to play with our heads. Living rent-free up there, Ian, Arthur Smith, in my head for years.
Chris, Dwayne probably touched on the most important factor here, and that is the impact of adding Big Mike to the offense. Could that actually downgrade George Pickens for you the rest of the way?
I wouldn't think it would downgrade George Pickens, but to Dwayne's point, we would have to see if there's any sort of Arthur Smith inclinations about trying to rotate him off. But Mike Williams does fit into how the Steelers are operating their passing game. But Russell Wilson, as of right now, over 20 play action concepts on over 20% of his dropbacks. And depending on which tracking system that you use, he either has somewhere between like 5 and 6 attempts across the middle of the field, which for Mike Williams purposes, operating along the perimeter, that's where we would want to see most of the work going to. So for Mike Williams specifically, I'd put him in that boom bust wide receiver 3 category if you happen to need him for a particular week. And looking at Pittsburgh's upcoming schedule, Washington, Baltimore, Cleveland, and then Cincinnati. But with Washington and Baltimore also making moves at the trade deadline to bolster their defensive secondaries, might be a little bit slow going at the start. But then once we get into or around the fantasy playoffs, it might be a guy you want to slide into your flex position, but we'll see how it goes.
Speaking of those cornerback moves, going to quickly run through the rest of the news from Tuesday. And yes, Chris, you mentioned it. Really, the biggest trade of the day was, in fact, the Washington Commanders going out and getting longtime Saints cornerback one, Marshawn Lattimore, sent a third, future fourth, and also a sixth-round pick in return for Lattimore and a fifth. So that was the biggest deal. We did also see the Rams trade cornerback Tre'Davious White to the Ravens. I will say, though, guys, because of injuries and father time, been quite a while since we saw Tre'Davious White operating as a top corner in the league. In fact, he has given up the highest passer rating in the NFL on targets into his covers this year. So don't think we need to shy too far away from, again, attacking that Ravens secondary in Fantasyland. Other Baltimore news, Lamar Jackson not practicing with a knee injury, although John Harbaugh already confirmed that he will be suiting up ahead of what should be an eventful Thursday night matchup there against the Bengals. Also, those Bengals, Zach Taylor did say newly traded for running back Khalil Herbert does have a chance to play Thursday. That would be cool. Sadly, though, not looking good for T. Higgins. He is still not practicing with that quad injury. Also not looking great for Ravens tight end Isaiah Likely, has not practiced this week with a hamstring. So, guys, early ranks, we'll see what happens the rest of the week. But Mark Andrews with no Isaiah Likely, certainly looking like back to his usual top 5 self. Also would note Colts place center Ryan Kelly on IR. Also, Steelers traded a 7th rounder for Packers edge Preston Smith, getting that front 7 even nastier. And finally, the Raiders made Scott Turner their new OC and called Daddy Norv to come in as a senior advisor. So just completely normal stuff continuing to happen with the Las Vegas Raiders. So that was your news recap, everyone. And now before we get to some maybe shade throwing, a quick shout out to our friends over at Mike's Hard Lemonade. Fantasy football season is here, and while that may be cause for celebration, there will also be some hard days ahead. That said, guys, Mike's Hard Lemonade wants to remind you that hard days deserve a hard lemonade. So after a hard day spent scouring the waiver wire or concocting the perfect trade or tinkering endlessly with your starting lineup, it's time to quench your hard-earned thirst with a Mike's Hard Lemonade. All right, fellas, as we do each and every Wednesday, on the Fantasy Life Show, it's time to throw a bit of shade. So get those knock-around polarized shades on with the UV 400 protection, of course. And let's go ahead and throw some shade at the Dallas Cowboys. So, Dwayne, I know you have a lovely T-shirt you'll wear from time to time. You know, some people drink to, for various reasons in their life. You do mostly because of the decisions that Jerry Jones makes. So go ahead and tell us more about the Cowboys' decision to trade for Jonathan Mingo, and maybe give up a little bit too much draft capital to do so.
Yeah, Jerry definitely makes me drink. And quick shout out to Knock Around. These are the fast lane sports version, Ian. So like we're talking about sports, we're living in the fast lane. We're about to be throwing some heaters at Jerry's head, give him some inside chin music. So yeah, but the clear gray with green moonshine, Ian. Check these things out. These are pretty awesome. But yeah. Look, man, I don't want to sit here and rip Jonathan Mingo because, he's just a young player trying to do his thing in the NFL. But yes, the Cowboys way overpaid for a player that's not shown to be a strong target earner in an offense that spent a 2nd-round pick on him, really needed him to step forward. Now, a lot of his underlying metrics, it's hard to blame too much of it on Jonathan Mingo just because the quarterback play with Bryce Young has been really bad. We've talked about that multiple times on the show. The big thing, Ian, is you give away a 4th-round pick. And if you look across the league at the trades that were happening yesterday, that just felt like a massive overpayment. I mean, this is more than what the Cowboys got for Amari Cooper. Now, we know that the dollars left on contracts, all those sort of things really play into some of these trades as well, right? You're really trying to get another team to pick up some of these dollars. But Mingo just hasn't shown enough to be a round 4 pick. To be honest, He's like the Spider-Man meme of Jalen Tolbert. They're the same thing. They are both like 14, 15% targets per route run, kind of guys you want to use down the field. I will say Mingo is a little bit of a bigger, more physical prospect. Obviously, I think what happened here, this was a guy that the Cowboys fell in love with, through the draft, process a couple of years ago. They probably thought they were going to potentially get him with a 2nd or 3rd round pick. They didn't. Okay, and they're still in love with him. They haven't adjusted their priors based on what's happened over these last 2 seasons. I mean, we're talking about a guy playing behind Jalen Coker, who was undrafted. Now, we love the cokeheads out there, but again, an undrafted guy came in and now getting more work than you. That's not a positive thing for Mingo. So again, not to dump on him too much, but just an overpayment by the Cowboys, who really seem to struggle to get a grasp on the NFL marketplace.
again, as a prospect, I don't blame people for being excited once upon a time. We are talking about a 6'1 player, 226 pounds, 4'4", 40. God only makes so many of those humans. But yes, Chris, we have seen certainly enough at this point to at least believe that original, second round draft capital was probably a bit of a reach. And now to go up a fourth for that, especially erroneous, Chris, when again, you look at the returns for these other wide receivers in the cycle. The Jets got Davante Adams for a conditional third. Bills got Amari Cooper for a third and a future seventh. Chiefs got DeAndre Hopkins for a conditional fifth. Steelers got Michael Williams for a fifth. Ravens got Deontay Johnson and a sixth in return for a fifth and a bag of chips. So, Chris, just to you, objective Bengals fan in the room, was this the worst trade you saw in the entire, basically, season?
I'd say the worst trade that I saw from anybody was the non-trade from the Bengals, because I'm wearing my knockaround shades, like for repping my Cincinnati team, not getting any defensive help, like for Cincinnati. That's the worst trade that I didn't see. But still, I'm with both of you guys. It was tough to see them try and bring in a wide receiver on an offense that we don't have a ton of confidence in moving forward. Whether if it was going to be Dak under center, throwing into multiple tight windows as he has so far, or now with Cooper Rush under center, he might Jonathan Mingo might be a wide receiver 3 for his team. We can't use this guy in fantasy. Ian, all of the trades for wide receivers that you pointed out, minus the Deontay Johnson one, were for guys that we can use. Everybody's rushing to use DeAndre Hopkins right now. Everybody wants to have Amari Cooper in their roster outside of the injury that he suffered just this past week. But any of those other guys, there's some utility for them in fantasy. And with Mingo now paired with Cooper Rush, he's supposed to beat out Vontae Turpin is now supposed to be the guy that's going to cede some work to him. There's just not a ton going on in Dallas's offense that we would want to have on our rosters anyway. So Jonathan Mingo to Dallas, it's a tough look for everybody all around.
We all love CeeDee Lamb, but after that, guys, Brandon Cooks still on IR for the time being. Now we have Jonathan Mingo, Jalen Tolbert, Jalen Brooks, Kevontae Turpin, and Ryan Flournoy in the wide receiver room. Somehow the running back room might even be worse. So we'll see what happens ahead of this NFC East showdown against the Eagles. I am currently repping the Eagles edition of the Knockarounds. Gotta love that Kelly green color. Not, I guess, on these ones, more of the dark green, but you guys could imagine. But yeah, you can get these and so many more options over at knockaround.com. Polarized lenses for less than $50, high quality for that low price. And again, got that UV 400 protection for your eyes. So whether it's the NFL editions or if you just want to go with more of a regular frame style, they truly have everything for you. So go check it out, guys, again. And you can use code LIFE for free shipping only at knockaround.com. All right, fellas, we got some important questions to ask about the Week 10 slate. But first, want to take a time and almost recap what happened over the first 9 weeks with some mid-season fantasy awards. We'll be going through the waiver wire pickup of the year, comeback player of the year, rookie of the year, bust of the year, which isn't really an award, but we're going to give one out anyway, and also the MVP. So, guys, let's kick things off with the waiver wire pickup of the year. And really, this was the only category we were all unanimous in. Baker Mayfield. How about this guy, Chris? I mean, not that we couldn't have seen a decent year coming. He was obviously very productive in 2023, but the QB2 behind Lamar Jackson for a guy regularly ranked outside the top 20 to start the year. What a season so far for Baker Mayfield, Chris.
I'm hoping Cleveland Browns fans are watching Baker Mayfield going off down in Tampa, and it's like, man, if we had just held on. Now I know with the injury concerns for Baker during his final time, like up there in Cleveland, that it was time to move on. But seeing him come out last year with Godwin and Mike Evans, and then lighting up the field with Dave Canales and all of that, and now coming into this season, there was concern about whether or not he would be able to repeat what happened in 2023. But at the start of the season, first in passing success rate, top 10 in EPA per dropback. But of course, he's a system quarterback. He has Mike Evans, he has Chris Godwin. Those are two high-end wide receivers. Take that all away, he's still around the top 12 in both of those metrics. Still being able to cook with whether it's Cade Otton, whether it's Sterling Shepard, going up against the Chiefs defense in prime time in the rain. It doesn't matter. This man continues to get it done on a week in, week out basis. So I give credit to Baker in terms of his evolution as a passer. Ton of credit to Liam Cohen from the offensive concepts he's been able to put out, like heavy play action, being able to move Baker out and actually using some of his skill sets to his advantage. All of that to say, Baker Mayfield, man, one of the guys that I'm really impressed by his change as a quarterback. And now, of course, the benefits we get to reap as fantasy managers.
Obviously, a couple other guys that could compete. Your Cedric Tillmans, maybe Kareem Hunts of the world. But yeah, guys, especially the fact that Baker, to Chris's point, getting it done without the services of his top 2 wide receivers with 5 passing touchdowns over these past 2 weeks. Truly, truly impressive. So, Dwain, another waiver wire pickup that you wanted to mention as the runner-up potentially in this award. Falcons wide receiver 2, I guess, but might as well call him 1B. Call him the 1 if you want, man. Darnell Mooney, someone who is available regularly after the top 50 wide receivers in drafts. Now someone who's regularly breaking into our weekly top 24.
Yeah, I mean, this guy was on the waiver wire for multiple weeks in a lot of leagues to start the season, like even though we kept talking about him. But I mean, look, he was with the Bears last season, Ian. He scored 5.3 fantasy points per game. Sorry, Swing. Just cover your ears in this part. He escapes the Bears. He goes over to the Falcons. Now he's averaging 14.4 fantasy points per game. That's top 24 on the season. And in a year where wide receivers are the running back, whenever we talk about the injuries that are happening, that's huge, man. Having someone like that you can pick up and help get you through these bye weeks and help get you through all these injuries that you've suffered at the wide receiver position, you could make an argument that that's more valuable to your fantasy team than even Baker Mayfield. Because quarterback, as much as we love it, it is just a onesie position. It's much easier to replace, to stream, to do other things to get by. But man, try working the waiver wire for a wide receiver. There are only a few that come along, and Darnell Mooney's done a really nice job. And just to put a bow on it, Keenan Allen, he joins the Bears, leaving the Chargers, goes from a 21.5 point per game player to 8.8. So something's in the water up there in Chicago, Ian. I know you've said it before, but it does show you what a difference quarterback plus scheme plus, target competition. It's a massive swing for these two players from where they were from one season to the next. So something that we obviously always try to think about as we're looking at players, but we probably overlooked Mooney a little bit too much this preseason.
I mean, I think it was easy to look at him and say, okay, this guy is going to outperform that wide receiver 62 ADP or whatever. But I never would have dreamed that Dwayne, that after 9 weeks, he is the 11th most PPR points at the position. Back-to-back top 12 finishes, and lo and behold, probably more on the way if we do end up seeing Drake London miss some time. So also been a joy to watch some of those crispy comeback and out routes, man. He puts a really good one on film almost every single week out there. So shout out Darnell Mooney, but yes, our waiver wire pickup of the midseason so far going to have to be QB2 overall, Baker Mayfield. Guys, move on to the comeback player of the year. Now, we do not have, I guess, any specific language like the NFL had to do after the DeMar Hamlin, Joe Flacco situation last year. So I guess decide however you want. I'm deciding what Chargers RB1, though. J.K. Dobbins, coming off an Achilles, coming off a devastating knee injury before that. And all the man has done so far is work as the RB13 in PPR points per game. I mean, Dwayne, with Dobbins, this was a guy who we really didn't even know if he was going to make the roster. I believe he only had $50,000 guaranteed. That said, as we got closer and closer to the start of the season, I know both of us started coming around more on Dobbins. And thank God we did, because, man, has he been great.
Yeah, he's been a massive hit. I mean, he's got a 68% snap share. He's averaging 16.2 fantasy points per game. That's the number 13 running back on the season. You got him essentially for nothing if you drafted him. Some of you even got him off the waiver wire if you're playing in a smaller league. So yeah, this is the slam dunk comeback player. I mean, coming back off the massive knee injury, the Achilles injury, seeing a player like this, obviously he's still in his youth, right? A guy that was still technically in his prime as far as years go, but to see him to be able to dust off those injuries, join a squad like the Chargers, who have a quality offensive line and a commitment to the run game, man, this was the perfect fit for J.K. Dobbins. And I remember, Ian, the exact point where my mind started to shift on J.K. Dobbins. It was actually you and I on a show, a live draft show, where we were arguing about Gus Edwards. And so the next day I just dug into the Chargers and I was like, this is J.K. Dobbins. Like the everything is pointing up here for J.K. Dobbins. He is really the chip that we want to put, he's the guy that we want to put the chip on in this backfield. Yeah, it would be an outlier, but outliers win you fantasy seasons. And when you can get them cheap like that in the right situation, I think it's something that, you've got to try to attack. And so I'm glad that we switched over to that. And hopefully you guys that are listening, you were listening too. And we were getting on that at the end. So we were really recommending people take J.K.
And that is why I do think it's really important, if you do want to go ahead and make your ranks and try to tell people about them, even if you're not, again, drafting these $1,000 teams every day or like that, Dwayne, it does help to actually get in the weeds of that war room and be forced to make those decisions, because lo and behold, again, a bit more clear sometimes when you're on that clock versus just typing numbers into a spreadsheet. So yeah, more PPR points per game guys than David Montgomery and Breece Hall this year. What a season so far from J.K. Dobbins. Chris, you're going a different direction though, and you were quite I don't want to say rude, but you wanted to make a point about this in our chat before. Joe Burrow, comeback player of the year. Go off, my friend.
I just had to remind folks. I remember we were on a show back in July answering similar questions about who had the highest potential to give us a y'all must have forgot type of season. Now, Joe Burrow isn't up in the top 3 as of right now from a fantasy quarterback standpoint, but I think we did kind of forget what Joe Burrow can provide from a fantasy standpoint. I'm old enough to remember folks freaking out over the fact that Joe Burrow couldn't pick up a water bottle correctly. Just a few weeks ago, if memory serves. But still, seeing the lack of production out of the receivers not named Jamar Chase, T. Higgins not being in the lineup for multiple weeks, Jermaine Burton not going to meetings, Joe Burrow has still finished as a top 12 quarterback in over half of his starts so far. The only quarterback to throw for 5 touchdowns in 2 games so far, and averaging the 8th most passing yards per game. So I'm with, after sustaining such a nasty wrist injury where folks thought this was going to be something that would affect him for his entire career, seeing the Bengals offense come back and still be the pass-happy passing game that we've seen in years past, and that's not while Jamar Chase is the focal point. We've seen T. Higgins mix in, Yoshi mix in, Jermaine Burton kind of fix in. But of course, Mike Gesicki just this past week, a cast of characters that we didn't all anticipate being a part of it as we've seen so far this year. Joe Burrow and comeback player of the year, at least for me. But I understand. Everybody else is like looking at J.K. Down. Ooh, Achilles injury and all that. Joe Burrow, come on, wrist injury. Come on, guys.
Gotta appreciate that risk. And just the fact that Burrow really was, the only kind of early-ish drafted pocket passer who hasn't been a major disappointment. We'll talk more about Patrick Mahomes finally putting a good game forward, but that was just his first top 12 finish of the season. And CJ Stroud, guys, you can blame it on the wide receiver injuries all you want, but he has been one of the bigger early round busts at the quarterback position as well. So definitely going to give J.K. Dobbins and yes, Joe Burrow a lot of the credit here. Again, though, guys like Kareem Hunt, if you want to give him a shout, certainly qualify as well. Let's move on, though, to the Rookie of the Year situation, and it's pretty much a slam dunk in real life, and I think it should be in fantasy as well. Jaden Daniels, Commanders QB1. Honestly, guys, probably in the MVP conversation, but, give it to Lamar Jackson. But still, Jaden Daniels doing some incredible things. Right now, joining a list that includes only Cam Newton, Justin Herbert, and RG3 as the only rookie quarterbacks to average north of 20 fantasy points per game during their rookie season. And Chris, that has come despite actually missing the majority of one game, being banged up with the rib injury and others. And let's face it, not exactly being surrounded by the world's best supporting cast. Obviously, we love Terry McLaurin, but it really does seem, man, like the sign of a truly great young quarterback is getting a lot out of Noah Brown in particular.
Right. And that's one of the biggest keys for me as to where Jaden Daniels is as a quarterback, because he's getting it done on limited production from everybody else. We came into the season thinking it was going to be Luke McCaffrey, Ben Sinnott, even Jahan Dotson before he got traded away to the Eagles. We thought this was going to be more spread out amongst the pass catchers, and it really has been Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz. So with the fact that they've been able to get this ground game working with Brian Robinson when he's been out on the field, Jaden Daniels ranks first among his peers in whether it's rushing success rate, passing yards per game, passing success rate. The Commanders' offense has been absolutely perfect when it comes to fourth down conversions. This is the offense that we were hoping we would get out of Jaden Daniels, and we're already seeing the effect of having this rookie quarterback on a deal that allows for them to bring in free agents or trading for players. We just saw them make the move for Marshawn Lattimore. Players, at least the vibes are immaculate at this point. Players want to come here. They want to try and build around what they have in Jaden Daniels, and it's an awesome thing to see. It almost reminds me of the guy I was just talking about a few minutes ago, just a few years ago. So with Jaden Daniels being our quarterback one for right now, at least from a rookie standpoint, it's an awesome sight.
QB4 in fantasy points per game. I definitely am not, staying awake at night regretting my decision to take Caleb Williams over him in dynasty drafts. Definitely could not.
Yeah, same.
Right, Chris. Now, Dwayne, again, Jaden Daniels, the easy answer, but you are not taking the easy way out here. Talk about Malik Neighbors and everything he has done during a pretty electric rookie season when he's been on the field, at least.
Yeah, look, we love both players. If you were listening to the Fantasy Life show in the preseason, there were not two names we touted more than Jaden Daniels at his price and Malik Neighbors. The other one was Rashee Rice. Now, unfortunately, the injury bug got him, but feel really good about those being kind of our flag plant players that we wanted folks to go out and draft based on where you could get them in drafts. But I would argue Malik Neighbors, NFL-wise, Jaden Daniels, yes, Rookie of the Year. I would argue Malik Neighbors is worth more than Jaden Daniels. In a year where all these rookies are hurt, this guy's the wide receiver 7, scoring 18.4 fantasy points per game. Now you compare that to, okay, what someone else is getting from the wide receiver 36 in your league. It's a big gap on what you're getting. Now, Jaden's a pretty big gap over a lot of the quarterbacks. Like a great example you gave, Ian, is if someone else took CJ Stroud and you drafted Jaden Daniels, man, you were winning that in a big way. So both guys that we like, but look, man, to see Malik Neighbors come out here in this offense, he's got a 37% target share. He leads the league, 50% air yard share. Those are two of the most sticky things year over year that tell us a wide receiver is really good because they own a major part of that. Now, he doesn't have a lot of target competition in New York, so that's part of it. But at the same time, man, he's their whole offense and he's doing it. He's come down a little bit here recently since the concussion, not quite what we saw early in the year. Targets and everything are still there. But if we see a little bit of a rebound like we saw from Daniel Jones last week, I think we're still in a really good spot as far as the rest of the way. You might have a top 6 wide receiver, definitely a top 12 wide receiver. And this is a guy that you were drafting in rounds 4 and 5 by the end of draft season. When we first started talking about this, we were talking about a round 6 pick. So that's a massive, massive haul, especially, again, giving all the wide receiver injuries that we've had where everyone else has been hurting.
Tied for second in the NFL in total targets despite missing those 2 games with a concussion. Safe to say, yes, the Giants offense has been the Malik Neighbors show. Guys, let's get, a little bit negative here. If you want to throw the shades back on, feel free. Bust of the year. I'm going to go with Sam LaPorta, okay? Now, I don't think this is a clear-cut slam dunk. If you wanted to go ahead and just draw the injury card and say Christian McCaffrey, I wouldn't even necessarily disagree with you there. But with LaPorta, guys, coming in as the tight end 1, costing a 3rd-round pick and just looking like, honestly, a safe bet where I don't think any of us would have dreamed he finishes outside the top 5. Right now, being outscored by guys like Zach Ertz, Mike Gesicki, Hunter Henry, even Jonnu Smith out here. So, and the big thing for me, I know we're going to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. in a second. At least with Marv, we got a couple of boom weeks out here. LaPorta literally hasn't finished better than the tight end 8 during any given week. So obviously still a great real-life player. And to be fair, he's been dealing with a few injuries as well, even if they haven't exactly kept him out of full games yet. But man, just so tough with LaPorta. Because Chris, for me, like when I'm looking at just and kind of thinking back on draft day, it takes like a certain choice to draft a tight end in round 3 and round 4. And then because you think you're like sealing the position. You're like, all right, I'm using this high draft capital, but I got Sam LaPorta or I got Travis Kelce. And then to have it flame and just fall out of control this badly, man, it hurts, Chris. It hurts. So yes, Sam LaPorta, certainly a bust, but also certainly a bust, Chris. Almost everyone you could have taken in round 1 except for Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, that's the thing that I keep going back to is that if you had a 1st-round pick, it's like you have that excitement. You were waiting to draft and actually build your fantasy roster. You've been waiting all season or all off season in order to do this. And your 1st-round pick, and you even get, let's say you even got a top 3 pick, and you wanted to draft Christian McCaffrey or Tyreek Hill or CeeDee Lamb, and you built your roster around those guys. Well, if you built your roster around Christian McCaffrey, you were probably pretty upset around Monday night during week 1. Then shortly after that, a couple weeks later with Tyreek Hill watching Tua Tagovailoa go down, you probably weren't too happy after that. It's just the list goes on and on of guys where either they've been hurt, A.J. Brown, or their offenses haven't met our expectations, or they've just evolved to the point where sometimes the passing game gets scripted out of games, like Amon-Ra St. Brown when Jared Goff only passes for 84 yards in a single game. Here and there, we've seen guys get either injured or have enough poor performances throughout the season where it's like, I just want to take my 1st-round pick. I'll just wait until the 2nd round and pick up all the guys after that. Like Drake London, I'll take him instead. Wait, that doesn't work either. But I'd say my biggest bust for this year has been the 1st round because there's just been a complete minefield of players. And I'm just hoping next year we get to the point where we can find guys we have a bit more confidence in than we have throughout the 2024 season.
Hindsight, hell of a drug. Would have been a lot cooler if we all just traded back and took Saquon and Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
Dwayne, you're bust of the year so far. Someone who maybe some people did take in round 1, usually more of a round 2 pick, but my God, he would not be going anywhere near that if we had the draft again. Talk about the artist known as Maserati Marv and some of the disappointing performances we have seen from the rookie through 9 weeks of action.
Yeah, and I threw injuries out. Like, if we included injuries in this, there would be guys that are bigger busts than this. But like Tyreek Hill, you want him on your fantasy roster now. Now I get it. The last few weeks have been tough. They're spreading the ball around, but you feel really good about where you are with Marvin Harrison Jr. While I think he's played well for a rookie, Ian. He's got a 23% target share. He leads the team in air yards. He's doing the things you would hope to see as far as thinking, okay, what does this guy's future look like? But this offense just hasn't been able to get in sync, and it's just not been good for Kyler Murray this year, averaging under 200 passing yards per game. And this is a player, to your point, in best ball land, people were taking this guy with the first pick of the second round. If you were in a redraft league, you were taking him at the end or the middle of the second round. Occasionally, you might slide into the third round. So for being a player that's been completely healthy and a player that's actually kind of doing his part, but to still only be the wide receiver 39 right now in fantasy points per game, that really hurts. I do agree with you, though, Ian. I think Sam LaPorta is the slam dunk. Like, as far as guys that are not injured, Sam LaPorta is the slam dunk because you use that third round pick. And he's giving you an absolute dud. You can't even have him in your lineup anymore at all. At least Marv, you can run him out there, to your point, as your wide receiver 3. And you know that, eventually regression is going to hit for him because he's getting targets and he's going to give you a big game. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to live through some duds, but you're going to get some big games. You don't even have that with LaPorta. You're just running him out there to get nothing. You're getting absolutely nothing. I mean, I finally had to break down and just be like, this dude's like tight end 18. This weekend. Like, we've kind of kept him around the borderline. It went in phases. We're like, he's going to be fine, guys. Still a top 3. We held on to that for about 3 weeks. We're like, okay, mid-range tight end 1, still a talented guy. And then about 2 weeks later, it's like, okay, guys, he's Tucker Kraft. He's a borderline tight end 1. And now it's like, just cut him. Just cut Sam LaPorta. Like, I might start Mark Andrews over this guy.
Just imagining Dwayne like seeing the tight end 18 next to LaPorta's name, chucking his whiskey glass against the wall, just furious about the whole situation.
The only thing that saved me from drafting a lot of Sam LaPorta was the fact that we could get all these other tight ends like 2 rounds later. And it's not that any of them have really worked out either. Like, some of them now, Evan Ingram due to injuries. The biggest name, man, George Kittle's been the one that smashed.
Yeah.
And, he's the guy that had all the target competition. Little did we know Brandon Ayuk wouldn't be able to play, once he came back from his holdout. Then he gets injured. Debo not staying healthy. We didn't know. It'd be great to know, 49ers beat reporters. The CMC isn't playing in week 1. But you guys can't give us that sort of information. Yeah, and I get it. Kyle Shanahan, the master of misdirection, on and off the field. I can't even blame you.
Yeah, so hopefully you pass on Sam LaPorta. Took a safe, good quality bet like Mark Andrews a round or 2 later. So, man, elite tight end, maybe not the year, but the season's not over yet. Remember, just going through the midseason awards. Yeah. But, guys, this takes us to the granddaddy of them all. It is the fantasy MVP, and how could it not be our one true king, Derrick Henry with the Ravens? I think we all saw this possibly coming, and lo and behold, my man's is on pace for 25 touchdowns, 2,163 total yards, and looking like an absolute smash play inside of a Ravens offense that has looked unstoppable for a large portion of the season. So, Dwayne, I mean, look, it's not like Henry was falling that far in redraft. He was usually off the board in the middle of the second round. And I know I was in some leagues with, maybe some a higher age limit than usual, where I did see Derrick Henry go in round 1 and everything. But, man, especially some of those best ball streets or earlier in the offseason when you can get him in the third round. Talk about a slam dunk pick to the only player not named Lamar Jackson, Baker Mayfield, with over 200 PPR points at this point in time.
Yeah, man, look, we talked about the potential match of this scheme with Derrick Henry, but I don't even think we could have imagined like how much upside this would bring. And I know we didn't imagine it because we didn't draft him enough, Ian. You and I drafted like 20 teams together. I think we have Derrick Henry twice. So that tells you even though we talked about that potential match with him and Lamar just being too much for defenses to handle, and that has been the case, we just didn't bake it in enough. And yeah, man, I mean, look, to talk about a guy that you mentioned, you're getting in round 2 and redraft. You play in best ball where everyone is supposedly smarter than everyone. The market is so sharp. You're getting this guy at the end of round 3. Oh my God, talk about galaxy braining yourself to death. Like that's what was happening in best ball on Derrick Henry this season. So yeah, look, if you've got him on your team, you're winning pretty much you're winning matchups single-handedly. That's how you talk about an MVP. If you have Derrick Henry on your team, he is single-handedly winning you matchups in some of these weeks. My son's got him on his team. I know he got him at the end of the second round. It's by far the best pick that he had of his entire draft. I mean, he's got other things busting around that, but because he's got Derrick Henry, man, he's still one of the best teams in his fantasy league because that's how good Derrick Henry's been.
I mean, you look at the efficiency, and that's the part that's blown me away because we had the touchdown stats, but we just didn't think there'd be that much receiving upside. And, again, we were wrong. I'm not trying to say it was even a good process. No, the process did not work out and everything, but 6.3 yards per carry right now, guys. That is the second highest mark in the Super Bowl era with at least 150 rush attempts behind only Jamal Charles back in 2010. So great stuff from
Ian.
Henry. Yeah.
Every week when I do the projection model for FantasyLife and I go in and I do Derrick, I put all the numbers in and it's all automated at first, right? Everything. And I have to go do the adjustments and, it's weighting to the way the season's going. And every week it's like Derrick Henry, 130 yards. And I'm like, start going and looking at the lines and the props. I was like, well, this is actually right. He's like averaging like 120 or something, but I have to bring it down just because maybe I shouldn't as much. Maybe you should just take the Derrick Henry over every single week on the rushing prop. Maybe that's the real thing. Maybe the model actually knows better than me at this point, but I usually have to bring it down like 10 or 15%. I'll leave it as a rushing over, but I won't leave it like as the first pass. It'll be like 125 yards. And it's all because of what you talked about. It's that efficiency and all those other things.
It's only going to get scarier too, man. You think Derrick Henry is ramping through defenses right now? Just wait until he gets a group that's already quit on themselves in week 15 when it's 30 degrees out there. That's when we're really going to see some fireworks from King Henry. Chris, you're sticking with the perp and the Ravens. However, someone else in the backfield, probably the real life MVP at this point. And in your opinion, also the fantasy one, Lamar Jackson. What a season so far.
I would just say if you have any attachment to the Ravens offense, good for you, whether it's minus Mark Andrews, we just had that conversation, but from Zay Flowers to Derrick Henry, for Derrick Henry specifically, to y'all's point, if you're getting brought up around names like Jim Brown and LaDainian Tomlinson in terms of workload and what you've been able to do with your touches, you're probably doing pretty well for yourself as a rusher at this point, especially given his age. But still, for Lamar Jackson specifically, just last season when he was the MVP of the NFL, around like a 50% passing success rate, 0.13 EPA per dropback. He's exceeded both of those numbers in 2024 through 9 weeks of the season. The man is playing above his own MVP level, and he's also operating an offense that's averaging around 445 yards per game. That's one of the highest marks in the league. There's only one other team so far averaging over 400 yards per game, and that's the 49ers. And the Ravens are also putting up 30 points per game, and Detroit is the only other team putting up around that same number. So this is a high-flying offense. This is a high-scoring offense. This is a highly productive offense. And at least for me, it all kind of intersects at Lamar Jackson. What he's been able to do in this second year with Todd Monken as the offensive coordinator, we've seen steps forward from Zay Flowers, and of course, bringing in a guy like Derrick Henry, it just makes it all unlocked. But for me, it's Lamar Jackson.
Those total fantasy points in the NFL seems like a good enough reason to be our midseason MVP to me. So last note, Dwayne, would be a runner-up call from you. Joe Mixon, someone who, no, we haven't exactly seen from week 1 to week 9, put up monster numbers due to injury. But when he's been out there, man, really not many running backs better.
Yeah, and it's just, again, this is purely fantasy. But you're talking about a guy you got in round probably 4 to 5, depending on what kind of league you were drafting in. If you were over on Underdog, you were getting this guy in round 6. So it's just a situation where, look, averaging 21.4 fantasy points per game, they give him everything, Ian. I mean, the guy over in his healthy games is getting over 80% of the rushing attempts, and an offense that honestly hasn't even quite lived up to expectations. So I feel like there's still a little bit of meat left on the bone. And just watching Joe Mixon, this is the best he's ever looked, in my opinion. So for a guy that was getting old, had a lot of carries, a lot of touches, had been very inefficient over the last 3 seasons. So not just a 1-year inefficiency issue, a multi-year inefficiency issue for Joe Mixon. And to come out and do this, look, think of this, Ian. There's a lot of guys like this. Alvin Kamara, if we like the Saints better down the stretch, you could have mentioned him. I mean, you've got Kenneth Walker. He's a guy that we talked about a lot in the preseason. There's a lot of running backs that were going between round 4, 5, and 6 that, man, if you stack those guys up and just ignore the wide receivers and say you're flexing 2 of them, you're destroying your entire league with running backs this year.
All you had to do, guys, was draft old running backs and offenses with questionable offensive lines. That really was the key to success here in Fantasy 2024. So those were our midseason awards. You can check out some more thoughts on those players in my weekly, mismatch manifesto article live on FantasyLife.com. And now we're getting some more goodness from that right after a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. A chill in the air, leaves falling to the ground, and football every weekend. That is what fall is all about. And you can make each weekend even more exciting by getting into the action with our partners at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $200 in bonus bets. All you have to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using our promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. Again, that is $200 in bonus bets instantly. And you can stay in on the action and use your $200 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. After all, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. Sports betting is not yet available in your state. Don't worry, you can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook. All right, fellas, time for everyone's favorite segment of the week. I love saying that before almost every other segment, but it's fraud check season, where we go through some of the top performing players from last week and try to determine if it was a fugazi or maybe if it was a sign of even bigger and better things to come. Starting off with Dwain, the QB5, Patrick Mahomes, coming off his first 20-plus point fantasy performance since week 12 of last season. Are we back in, Dwain, or was this just a good matchup against the Buccaneers?
Well, it was a great matchup, and we all pushed Patrick Mahomes way back up the ranks last week after him being really low the week before. But looking at the larger trend here, Ian, 3 out of the last 4 games have been really nice. 331 yards passing against the Saints, came down for 154 against the 49ers, but 262 against the Raiders and 291 against the Bucs, and 5 touchdowns in the last 2 games. So that's a little bit more the Patrick Mahomes that we have known in the past, and it was nice to see that connection with DeAndre Hopkins. So I do think there's some room here to feel better about Patrick Mahomes the rest of the way. I think the challenge is really getting Mahomes back into that level that we've become so accustomed to, right? And we saw this last year. He was not in that range, but we know the years before that we were just so used to Patrick Mahomes being a top 3 fantasy quarterback, and he's not back there yet, right? This is a different team. Their drop back rate over expectation is -2%. They're very willing to run the football. They've got a good defense. The way the Chiefs are trying to win today is very different than the way they were trying to win football games 3 and 4 years ago. And I think that's still the reality. You're going to get Isaiah Pacheco back here at some point. They've got a nice ground game going. So I think Patrick Mahomes is better than, kind of the midseason, not midseason, but weeks 4 and 5, or 3-4 slump we saw where he didn't throw any touchdown passes. And it was just an absolute mess for Patrick Mahomes in those games. So I think he's better than that. But I don't think that he's going to be back to being a top 3 quarterback the rest of the way. I would say, depending on matchups every week, he's going to be right there in that borderline QB1 conversations. Some weeks, we might have him more around 7 or 8. Some weeks he might be more 13 to 15. I think he's going to live in that range the rest of the way.
You heard it from Dwain. Patrick Mahomes confirmed fraud, not going to be cracking our top 5.
Did not say that.
Here soon. Dwain's QB12, my QB14. I hear you, my friend. Chris, let's talk about a running back. 8th most PPR points in the league last week. Rico Dowdle coming off season high marks in usage. Do you think he'll be getting fed the ball enough in future weeks to still be a staple in fantasy lineups, even without Dak Prescott under center?
I have concerns about what his workload is going to be. It would be great if we knew for certain Ezekiel Elliott wasn't going to be a larger part of the offense moving forward, if Dalvin Cook also wasn't going to be a part of the rotation. But we don't know that. They had to sit Ezekiel Elliott because he wasn't attending team meetings or just essentially doing his own version of Jermaine Burton. Maybe there's something going on with guys that either are or come from Ohio, something like that. But either way, there is something about how they're deploying their running backs that makes none of them trustworthy as of right now. But I would say I wouldn't call Rico Dowdle a fraud. It's just more of his usage, because from a talent standpoint, Dowdle is the best running back on the Cowboys roster as of right now. He's first in adjusted yards after contact per attempt, forced missed tackle rate, rushing success rate, insert metric here. You'll see Dowdle up at the top compared to his peers like within Dallas. So with the way that the Dallas offense, at least what we will project for them moving forward with Cooper Rush under center, I don't want to have either of any of these guys outside of, you said earlier, CeeDee Lamb and maybe Jake Ferguson as starters on my roster. So I would say for right now, I would put Dowdle more in the RB3 category and looking at their upcoming schedule. Philadelphia, Houston, Washington with their upgraded defense, and of course the Giants. None of them really grade out as positive matchups for any of the running backs. So for Dowdle specifically, not him as a fraud. His usage, though, does make him a fraud for fantasy, at least for me.
And again, can't overstate enough how much of a downgrade it is going to be with Cooper Rush under center. And you don't have to take our word for it. You can just look at the team implied totals for this week, courtesy of the Vegas odds makers. And yes, only the Cowboys, Broncos, Patriots, and Titans are implied to score 17 or fewer points. Yikes. Dwain, let's talk about a wide receiver. Actually quite good at football. And spoiler, this is one of the few guys that I don't think is actually a fraud after his last week's big performance. Davante Adams coming off a wide receiver 6 boom, following a pair of duds with 55 scoreless yards. So schedule's starting to look pretty nice for the Jets moving up. Dwain, are you a believer in Aaron and company keeping it going?
Absolutely. I mean, we look at the 3 games that he has been with Aaron Rodgers. He's got a 27% target share. I know these guys have past chemistry, but that's still really impressive. Look at all the other wide receiver trades that we've seen this year and how long it's taking those players to acclimate to their offense. Now, injuries, different things have been involved, but you can look at Amari Cooper. You saw Deontay Johnson having to ease him in last week. Davante Adams, he just steps right in and starts earning targets. Now, the fantasy points didn't come until last week, Ian. He gave you 22.1. He was the wide receiver 7 or wide receiver 6 on the week. You will definitely take that. But the underlying data points tell us that this is really good for Adams. It's a condensed offense now around him and Garrett Wilson. Not really much going to Tyler Conklin. They don't run a ton of 3 wide receiver sets. They get a fullback out there sometimes. So really, Breece Hall is the next best target earner on the team. You got rid of Mike Williams. Allen Lazard's on IR right now. So I think right now, especially, things stay very condensed around these 2 players. The other positive that you have, Ian, is don't look now. I get it. The Jets haven't been good as far as NFL from an NFL perspective, but Aaron Rodgers from a fantasy standpoint has really been good over the last 4 games. He gave you 294 yards and 2 touchdowns, 276 yards and a touchdown, 233, but threw for 2 Ts. Last week, a very efficient performance. Didn't have to do a lot with the Texans basically wetting the bed. 211 yards and then 3 passing touchdowns on that. So look, we're talking about a passing offense that's probably going to average somewhere between 240, 260 yards per game and have a shot at 2 touchdown passes per game. That's enough for Garrett Wilson and for Davante Adams. And you're going to get blow-up games where they do a lot more than that. So I'm looking at the rest of the season schedule, and I agree with you. I think there's some really nice spots here. Also, probably, underdog, pick 'em. This is probably one that I would be looking at over there is taking the over, pressing that number up even higher, trying to press that advantage. If probably coming in like 60 yards, 64 yards is about where it's been. Those are the kind of guys I like to run up to like 89, and see what happens, because then you get that boost, Ian, on your play.
Both Dwain and I have Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams as top 15 plays at the position this week. Giddy up, guys. Cardinals, Colts, Seahawks, Dolphins, Jaguars, and Rams here coming up. Dolphins only match up against a defense that ranks, anything better than 19th in PPR points per game allowed to wide receivers. Chris, going to round things out with someone who, yes, is a fraud in terms of finishing as a tight end 7 last week. I'm going to go ahead and get that one off the chest. But maybe we could see something closer to, say, borderline tight end 1 production rest of the way from Theo Johnson, Chris, a rookie who, hey, let's face it, has been playing better ball of late and does have that, pesky full-time role that's pretty hard to find at the position.
Yeah, and I think looking at his usage over the past 3 weeks, the trends do indicate a tight end that if you are looking for the production at the position, because you have been frustrated with guys like Sam LaPorta, like we were talking about earlier, he's not the worst option for you, because since week 7, targets per route run, targets, and also air yards have also been on a steady increase, all culminating with him finding the end zone just this past week. So from a usage standpoint, I would say Theo Johnson grades out as not fraudulent, but I would say looking at at just this past week, that is where my general concerns are, because for Daniel Jones specifically, season low pressure rate, season high completion rate for Daniel Jones, and we all know that he has a stinker up his sleeve at any point throughout the season. But on the bright side, the next couple of matchups, because they do have their bye coming up in week 11, Tampa Bay and the Panthers are on the schedule for the Giants so far. So defensive secondaries that we would want to target. And if we are seeing a bit less from guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, because their target shares, his target share has started to dip down, and also Darius Slayton as well has been seeing a little bit less work. So if we are down to a two-man show from a pass catching standpoint, with it being primarily Malik Neighbors, then maybe we could see a bit more of Theo Johnson. From a tight end standpoint, not the worst option for you to pick up and use over the next couple of weeks or so.
Even after those NFC South potential layups, Cowboys, Saints, Ravens, Falcons, Colts, I know it's Daniel Jones, I know it's the Giants, but that schedule really is looking pretty good for the rest of the way, everyone. So that was Fraud Check. Now before we get out of here, let's talk about some of the biggest mismatches ahead of Week 10. As always, I tweet out a series of charts that you can also find in my manifesto article, basically combining metrics from the offense and defense to get an idea of where the biggest mismatches are in terms of net yards per pass attempt, yards before contact per carry, pressure, EPA, and explosive plays. So, Dwayne, going to start off with a pass game look at a Vikings offense that, lo and behold, has another smash spot this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, Justin Jefferson, someone that's going to be in lineups of all shapes and sizes forever and always. But, Dwayne, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, are you willing to go to the well with them again in what looks to be a smash spot?
Well, look, I think the big thing is, Sam Darnold. Like, we're consistently putting this guy in our top 6, 7, 8 quarterbacks now for multiple weeks in a row. I think a lot of the issues with Sam Darnold that we saw him really get, sunk with the New York Jets, also with the Carolina Panthers, we're still seeing them. Like, something's wrong with the processor. Like, he takes way too many sacks. He makes 2 or 3 throws every week. We're like, whoa, that could have been a pick 6 at a really bad time. But the guys around him are good enough. You've got the good scheme here from Kevin O'Connell, and that's been enough, especially against these bad defenses. Over the last 3 games, Ian, 259, 240, 290 passing yards with 1, 2, and 3 passing touchdowns. So, yes, that definitely puts Jordan Addison back on the map. I know, guys. Look, he's very frustrating. He's very frustrating because the targets are not there, and that can happen when you got a guy like Justin Jefferson across from you. But I went back, man, Ian, and I watched the film on him again yesterday. He's doing nice things out there. It's just that Justin Jefferson gets so much of it. Any game now, though, I'm telling you, Addison's going to blow up for like 125 and 2 touchdowns. This is the kind of matchup where that could definitely happen for him. And again, we've seen the passing yards there over the last couple of weeks. So TJ Hawkinson, I think that's a name I'm trying to trade for right now. I mean, going and getting Hawkinson was already right at that 65% route participation in his first game back. Targets weren't quite there yet, but we can only expect that to get a little better every game moving on from here on out. So, also in the ranks last night, I just couldn't find a way to keep him outside of the top 12. I kept working him up the board, like saying, would I start him over Zach Ertz? Yeah, I would. And I like Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz has been good, but I think TJ Hawkinson has shown us in the past, Ian, that he can be a special tight end. We know he's still recovering from injury, but in this matchup, I really like him.
I'm with you, man. Both of us have Hawkinson ranked as a top 10 tight end, really trying to avoid being a week late to the party there. So Sam Darnold, top 7 QB. Again, great stuff for the Vikings. Also good pass game matchups this week for the Falcons, Eagles, 49ers, and Ravens. Not so much for the Patriots, Titans, Broncos, Panthers, and yes, the Kyler Murray-led Cardinals. Chris, let's go to the run game where we see one of the better matchups of Week 10 in favor of Christian McCaffrey and the San Francisco 49ers, facing a Buccaneers defense that has just been getting fleeced by offenses over the better part of the last month and a half. Really looking good for CMC. How confident are you, though, in his usage, hopefully being big enough to take advantage of what looks to be a smash spot?
I'm not confident, because if Kyle Shanahan doesn't even want to give us enough confidence to start him at the beginning of the season, who's to say that we don't see a diminished workload for Christian McCaffrey when he comes back? But if he does come back and we do get enough positive practice reports throughout the remainder of the season such that it lends itself to, I would say, a mid-range RB1 type workload for Christian McCaffrey, and they're not trying to just ease him back in. They do want to see what they can get out of him in his first game back after 2.5 months with the Achilles tendonitis. this is the matchup that you would want to start him against. Like, to your point, according to our DVP tool available on the site, go and check that out at fantasylife.com. The Bucs rank bottom 12, or the fourth best matchup for running backs, and they're bottom 12 in rushing yards allowed to opposing running backs. But it's not just the rushing production. This is a thing that it's been missing out of the 49ers offense since Christian McCaffrey hasn't been in the lineup. It's been the targets to running backs. I know we saw Isaac Arendo get mixed in as a receiver, 17% target share back in week 8. But if we see Christian McCaffrey get the workload that we've seen him had in years past, he should be the RB1 for this week. Bijan Robinson, 743-1 as a receiver. Samaje Perine, we just watched him go up against the Bucs, 425-1 as a receiver. Even Justice freaking Hill, 344-1 as a receiver. So this is a type of running back, a hybrid, both rusher and receiver, that you'd want to have in your lineup against the Bucs. And if Christian McCaffrey is that guy coming back after the Achilles tendonitis, I want him in my lineup.
No Justice Hill slander on this show, Chris. I know it's game week for you Bengals fans out there. I know we got it coming
just one more week.
That's fair.
Yeah, the key with that Bucs defense is they play more zone coverage than any other team in the NFL, and that's a cheat code for pass catching backs. That's where the targets tend to go. Whenever you get zone coverage, less targets to the wide receivers, more targets to the tight ends and to the running backs, especially if you've got a special one like McCaffrey. So great call by Chris.
Safe to say it has not been working. Bucs have allowed 36, 27, 41, 30, and 30 points over their last 5. So only other 2 quick things I want to point out, everyone, is in terms of pressure, which again, check out these charts over there in my manifesto article. Aaron Rodgers should have all kinds of clean pockets to work with against the Cardinals. Got to be feeling good there. And as Dwayne mentioned previously, really is a situation where we've seen Rodgers and this entire Jets passing game balling out recently. So get those guys in your lineups. Also looking good for the Bengals and Giants. A bit more murky for the Patriots, Steelers, Eagles, and Texans, who, man, they have not been able to protect CJ Stroud recently. Hopefully Nico Collins gets back in action. Also want to say, speaking of those clean pockets for the Bengals, should see an absolute shootout on Thursday night between the Bengals and Ravens, them, the Steelers and Commanders, Jets and Cardinals, as well as the 49ers and Buccaneers, the only matchups with positive offensive combined EPA on both sides of the football. So get your popcorn ready for those. On the other hand, Broncos, Chiefs, and Titans, Chargers really sticking out as the 2 potential defensive slugfests of the week. So that was our mismatch focus. Again, you can see all that and more in my manifesto article. But otherwise, guys, just have a great freaking Wednesday. Myself, Dwayne, and Matthew Freeman will be back with Sicko Starts, Freeman's favorites, and all the rankings questions you might have ahead of week 10. Until then, ace those waiver wires, maybe pull off a trade or 2, and just overall do your thing. So for Chris, for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.